One. Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. I got a super easy question that has a super important outcome on your profit and loss statement. And it's hard sometimes to make this connection. So I found an expert that's going to unpack this. So let me ask the question to you first. We'll introduce the guest and then we'll get their feedback on this. So the question is really easy, but it's really complicated on the back end. And the question is, why do your employees stop caring? And we're going to get into engagement today. We're going to get into what this costs. We're going to get into a ton of stuff. But I found the guy that asked this question. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Dave Garrison. How are you today?
Dave, excited to be here and looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. You are the Chief Navigation Officer at Garrison Growth. So, questions out of that. What's a navigation officer and what is Garrison Growth? So, you answer them in whatever order you want, but those are my first two for you today.
Dave, we selected the name Garrison Growth because our purpose and our mission is to work with leaders and leadership teams on unlocking potential. How do they achieve things together that none of them could achieve on their own? So that's the growth piece.
Okay.
And navigation officer is I don't have the answers. I can ask questions. The leaders have the answers within themselves. The team have the answers within themselves. So I see our job as assisting with navigation. How do you get to that potential that is never tapped into in most teams? And so
Wow.
it's like you have a baseball team or a football team with all these star individual players
Sure.
all reporting to their leader but not connected to each other in a way that is aligned, contributing to what they could only imagine is possible.
Wow. Well, and you put two words together which are great. It's a great thought is unlocking potential. And
Hmm.
sometimes I know from my previous experience where you just show up to work to get your job done. You know, you have a pile of stuff, you got to get it done, and you get happy when you check off some of the things on the list. I mean, how in the world do you go from just that menial task thought process to unlocking potential that you never even knew existed? That seems to be a big jump. So kind of help us connect those two dots if you can.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we were developing our weekly newsletter today, and it's really about what is the role of the leader? Is the leader to tell people what to do? Is the leader to get to their to-do list and check stuff off? And what we argue is, no, actually, the leader's very important job is to prepare people and teams for change. Because what I know to be true is all the things that I experienced in the past will never happen again. And so telling people what they should do based on what happened to me is not helpful. But using my experiences to inform my questions can be very helpful. And so, yes, there are things you have to get done. Yes, the to-do list is important. The question is, how do you set aside time for growing people? How do you set aside time for aligning teams? How do you set aside time for unlocking potential?
Wow. And I think that those are questions, Dave, that a lot of people just they skate right by because of that word you use, time. You know,
Mhm.
I hear this all the time. I don't have time for this. I don't have time to grow my team. I don't have time to invest in my team. I gotta make rent. I gotta make payroll. I gotta. And I totally get that piece. But I think this is if you don't address this, that this to me seems to be why employees stop caring. And it's interesting for today, it was like, the research shows somewhere in the $5 to $6 billion range per year that this is costing us as companies in the US. So, if you don't think it's affecting you, this is probably one of those blind spots that you have that this is really a tough scenario. But you said prepare for change. How do you deal with people that aren't really built for change? Because there's a lot of personalities that just like the same thing every day. They like that consistency. How do you help people prepare for change?
Yeah, I think that if they thrive on consistency, and particularly in these times of uncertainty, you have an opportunity to remind them of what's not changing and help them to spot changes and then share that information with people who do thrive on change. So, this is the simple idea that we all contribute something different, but
Yeah,
we are all responsible for being aware of opportunities and threats to our business if we are well informed about what our purpose is, about what our objectives are, about what our rules of engagement are, what our measures are, what our values are. If we know all those things, then every single employee is equipped to be basically on the front lines of spotting opportunity and threats, which are all about change.
sure. And I'm guessing, Dave, a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders that are listening right now, they're just, again, so dialed into their day to day that they forget that there are a team of people and they all have needs. And I think we forget that piece as leaders and we just make the assumption they'll always show up, they'll always have a smile on their face. And I, as a leader, I don't really have much to do with it. That's kind of that misnomer. I like that your latest newsletter is going to be talking about the role of the leader. Is that generally what you see when you start with people, is they tend to push that off onto the team, or are you finding leaders taking that responsibility for themselves early on?
I think that it's as you described it, but I would add this assumption that we hear among leaders. If they had questions, they would ask me. Or even worse, if
Yeah,
I describe something and say, "Do you have any questions?" That's not a question that's going to get a good answer. It's like saying, "Hey, I've got a great idea. Do you agree with me?" Well, what am I supposed
yeah,
to say? Well, of course I got to agree with you. Do you have any
right,
questions? Nope, don't have any questions. It doesn't tell
right,
you they have any comprehension. It doesn't tell you they're aligned with your idea. It doesn't tell you that you're in agreement. It just says that they're not going to ask you a question right now, but they may have
right.
no understanding of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, again, I think leaders have a role that is becoming more and more critical in the success of the team. I do run into people that are like, man, if I had a better team, we wouldn't have this issue, type of thing. And it's just, it doesn't sit right because you're the leader. You created this team. You kind of are pointing the team in the direction that it needs to go. So is Garrison growth focused on leadership development? Do they work with the teams? Kind of explain how you insert yourself into this if somebody's listening and they are have a team that's struggling.
Yeah, and more typically than leaders saying, "I don't have the right team," more typically what we hear is, "Do you know what? I've got really great players on my team. I'm proud of every single one, but I know we have the potential to do more. I
Okay.
know we could get more done. I don't have time to get to what's really important. We're so swamped with what's going on, we can't
Yeah,
get there." And so we work with leaders individually and leadership teams on a couple of things. One is strategic preparation, strategic planning for the future. And this is by engaging people and generating buy-in on the plan as opposed to making a plan or even worse, saying, "Okay, we're going to grow by 12% next year. How are you going to do it?" That's not a plan. That's not a program. That's a
sure,
dictated budget. And so
sure,
one is strategic planning. Another is leadership development, where leadership is the ability to have deep listening skills. Leadership is the ability to ask the right questions. Leadership is the ability to understand what great looks like in a collective sense, to tap into what we call collective genius. That's what
sure.
leadership skills are all about. And you know what? Through no fault of their own, we are not training leaders to do that. And yet, the leaders who do that and create high engagement or buy in, as we call it, have a competitive advantage that doesn't show up on the P&L and doesn't show up on the balance sheet right away, but creates huge increases in value because you have a competitive advantage of people.
Yeah. Well, and I think a big blind spot for a lot of people, a lot of business owners is they don't know that their people, their team can be a competitive advantage, and they might see, like you said, some of the potential there, but they're not really sure, excuse me, how to lock that in. Um, You talked about buy-in, Dave, and I'm just curious because buy-in equals engagement, like you said. But yet, I mean, Gallup shows their poll that less than 1 in 3 of the people in the US workforce are engaged in their job. And I think that that is like such a hard thing for people. We train on this around the country and speak on it. And I think it's funny because I don't know about you, but I most people that I run into come up to me after my talk on employee engagement and they're like, I don't know, most of my team seems to be engaged. And I think if that's the case, there's got to be a big company somewhere where there's just loaded with disengaged people because I've yet to run into the guy or girl that's willing to fess up to those numbers. Is 1 in 3 kind of that's what Gallup sees? Is that about what you're seeing in engagement, or how do you land on that?
Well, what's really interesting is that year after year after year, Gallup does this poll of different people and the numbers come up the same. So if it's
Right.
not any of the companies we're talking to, who is it? And so what I would
Exactly.
encourage leaders to do is to be curious and, we've got a free online assessment that you can share with your leadership team. Take the assessment, ask your leaders what they're experiencing, ask what they're seeing. But here are signs without any poll, here are signs of lack of engagement. One,
Sure.
meetings start late or get canceled. Meetings run over. Missed objectives. It's things like turnover, even though we pay a fair wage. It's
Yep.
things like people doing exactly what they're asked, but no more. It's people unclear about what their role really is. Oh, I thought somebody else was going to do that. Those are just some of the symptoms that you might see that
Yeah.
indicate an engagement issue.
Wow. So do you see that 1 in 3 is a pretty accurate? I mean, is that kind of what you guys
Very.
use as a thought process? Which means, and again, I'm not a mathematician, but I use a simple, 10-person team. That basically means 3 people show up engaged. They want to move the company forward. They want to move themselves forward. They want to move the customer forward. But then you have, Dave, 7 people that are sitting there and again, the way the rest of that is five of those 10 roughly are not engaged, and then 2 of them are actively disengaged. I mean, it seems like we kind of forget that group of people, this 5 out of 10 of our team, that they're not bad people.
Mm-mm.
Sometimes they're just lost. They don't even know where to go. I mean, that's where I feel like leaders have the biggest advantage is trying to teach those 5 engagement opportunities to really build up that team. And I'm just curious if you have that same thought that those middle 5 are really where the potential, unlocking that potential is. It seems that's the untapped group, right?
Absolutely. And it begins with the leader. It's no fault of the people who are in that five or the leader that there's a lack of engagement. It's not a fault. It's something that hasn't been paid attention to. And frankly, leaders are not equipped
Yeah,
to address it, nor do they know how. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't cost anything. And in the
right.
book, The Buy-in Advantage, we outline how great leaders have actually done it. So it's not my story of how wonderful I am. It's look, here's what I've learned from amazing people. And the
Sure.
five who are not engaged are not like they're grumbling and they're unhappy. So if
Right.
we measure are people happy, it's a different measure than engagement. It's not do they do what we ask? That's not a measure of engagement. That's a measure of compliance.
Sure.
Nothing wrong with that. It just leaves huge potential on the table. Here's what I'd ask. On Friday night, imagine you're at your local high school and feel the energy in the stands at the high school football game. And then
Hmm.
look at those exact same parents and friends and neighbors on Monday morning at work. I would
Sure.
argue engagement's what's happening Friday night.
Yeah.
And Monday, we've created an environment where we're not inviting people to be engaged. We're not creating the processes by which people can be their full selves and bring their heart and bring their gut and bring their brains to work.
Yeah. Wow. Wouldn't that be awesome to see a full engaged team at work? I mean, I'm assuming then, Dave, that people come to Garrison Growth with a team that's struggling, And then on the back end, they're seeing this, oh my gosh, I didn't know this potential was there. That has to be pretty rewarding for you, but that has to be pretty life-changing for the leaders and owners of those companies. Do they seem to see a big difference? Is it like, oh my gosh, it's a huge difference, or are we talking more small course corrections along the way?
It is 1,000 course corrections, but yes, they see the difference. So I think about two different companies. One is actually the department of a company that has low engagement, but this department has done the work over the last 18 months and is
Okay.
seeing the results. And what was striking to them is when we went back to the list of what's not working 2 years ago, so we said, what's not working? And they all knew they could all list it out. When
Yeah.
we went 2 years later and looked at that same list, they said, well, that's not an issue. That's not an issue. We already dealt with that. And they get the
Okay.
self-esteem and the positive momentum and positive energy of creating change. The second company I think about, good people, hard workers, they were not aligned. So when we got them lined up and in agreement and having discussions about what's important and how collectively they were going to get it done, they achieved record sales, record profits, not just for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years in a row. And
Wow.
they know that they don't know what the future holds, but they know they've got the potential and they know they've got organizational momentum. And that is a psychological condition that doesn't show up on the balance sheet. It's not in your KPIs, and yet you can feel it when you walk in the building.
Wow. Well, and I think people, as they're listening to us talk about this, Dave, that cost word comes in their mind, not only financial, but time, energy. What if I lose people along the way? What if they don't buy into what we're selling here? Do you tend to get a lot of people, teammates that migrate and leave because of this, or do you tend to see people learning and discovering new things about themselves and actually moving forward?
What a great question. If they're in an organization that has beaten all the energy out of them unintentionally,
Sure.
it reminds me of a shirt I saw of a pilot. So there's an FAA shirt that says the beatings, will continue to morale improves. If we've
Yep.
beaten all the energy out of them and we come in and say, hey, we're going to try something different. Let's go for engagement. The
Yeah.
first reaction is, uh-huh, here's another program.
Right.
And they're going to be from Missouri and they're going to say, show me. And so it's going to take honest intent, authentic intent by the leader to say, I want to try something new. Here's why. And it may not work the first time. Will you please work with me? And so you need to bring people along. People aren't going to say, oh, I was waiting for this opportunity. I heard a podcast and I can't wait to do this.
Yeah.
But if you're authentic and if you share people's intent and tell them why it's important, and I'll tell you, all the money in the world and all the costs in the world is not going to be a motivator to those five people. But if you say to them, do you know what? Every time we have a turnover, I can't imagine how much more stress it is on you because you have to do double duty. You can't do
Sure.
your own work. Is that right? And people are going to say, oh, that's right. How much time are we spending interviewing and training replacement people because somebody left?
Yeah.
And so turnover has a cost that's psychological and emotional that drains organizations. And people just become immune. Oh, here's the next new guy. And
Right.
it is really defeating. And I would argue that cost is as significant as any dollar cost.
Well, and that's a great way to look at it. I think the short-sightedness of a lot of us leaders is I can buy my copy paper and save $1 a ream, and I use, let's say, 1,000 reams a year, whatever. I can show I'm going to save $1,000 by doing this act, right? They're very intentional. A lot of us leaders are very intentional with that. In this case, it seems where this is like pretty ambiguous, where I'm going to give Dave Garrison some money and something good at the end is going to happen. I'm not really sure what, and I'm not really sure if I pay Dave X, it's going to respond, I'm going to get X back in return. So I'm just curious when you run into those types of people, Dave, how do you deal with that? Because I'm guessing there's two or three people around the world listening right now that are having that exact question. I'd love to do it, Dave, but what's my ROI going to be? How am I going to notice this return on my investment?
Yeah, that's a great question and a fair question. What I'd say is go to the data, look at firms of endearment, look at the Gallup data on the profit levels of firms with higher engagement, greater than 20% of those with average engagement. Follow the money. But more
Yeah,
importantly, I would say, what does it cost you to try this? And the answer is time and intention. The techniques that we lay out in the book cost nothing. I'm not selling some software programmer snake oil,
yeah,
and you don't have to hire Garrison Growth. We lay out all the tools in the book. If you want to use us, we can guide you and speed up the process. We've seen 1,000 situations we can apply experience to, but look at the techniques in the book, listen to the audio, take the free online assessments, do it yourself. That's fine, but it costs you nothing. But here's what it takes you as a leader to reframe what your job as a leader is. It takes giving up on beliefs like people work for money. So if I pay them money, then we'll call it good and they shouldn't leave. And if they leave, they're ungrateful. And you have to give up on attitudes like that. And you
yeah,
have to recognize that today's workforce, people are looking for a couple of things that weren't the case before the pandemic. It changed. It changed us as a society. It
sure,
changed the meaning of work. And people are wondering, what's the purpose of the work we're doing here? Why does it matter? Why should I
right,
care? And can I identify with a purpose? And it's never about money. The second thing is, what's my opportunity for personal or professional growth? My opportunity for personal or professional growth. A third is, um, tell me about the environment in which I'm working. Is this a supportive team where we can get things done? Are these people I want to hang out with? It's not, do I want a best friend? It's, look, can I trust these people? Can we work together? If you can accomplish the identification of a purpose greater than money, a sense of community, a clear understanding of how it gets done, and hear people's voices, then you can increase engagement starting as soon as people believe you. As
yeah,
soon as people believe you. But you've got to give up that, oh, people are just here for money. I just have to throw more money at them. That's
right.
old school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hey, we're going to take a quick break, Dave. When we come back, I want to kind of unpack this trust piece because I think that's a foundation that often gets overlooked. So we'll be right back. Welcome back. Honored to be hanging out with Dave Garrison, the Chief Navigation Officer at Garrison Growth. And we are trying to answer this question of why do employees stop caring? And I think, again, one of the things that is foundational is actually trust in the workplace. And there's research that shows that if your team doesn't trust you as a leader, the chances of them being engaged at work are 1 in 12. And it goes to 1 in 6 or 1 in 2, I'm sorry, if they actually do trust you. So, do you run into people, Dave, where there is that trust gap between the leader and the team and, it's us versus them type of thing? Do you still run into that a lot?
I don't know a lot, but I can tell you that it's very easy to see a low trust organization. And you see it in terms of low participation in discussions. You see it in compliance, like, okay, whatever you want, just tell me what you want.
Yeah,
It's so obvious when you see it, and yet I don't know that leaders appreciate how it is like a cancer in the organization that just destroys engagement and increases turnover, which is very costly because then you've got to retrain people and you have a bunch of greenies.
yeah. Wow. Well, and I think that lack of participation is a warning sign. There's probably a dozen different things that when you do deep dive on disengaged employees, it'll start, they don't, like you said, they don't show up on time for meetings or they don't show up at all, or these meetings are just, ad nauseum, or in this case here, there's no trust. I mean, there's no connection. People throw other people under the bus. There's all these things that you start to see, and sometimes there's this leadership kind of concept that they do this hands off. Hey, I'm just going to let my team, work those things out themselves. That doesn't seem to be really healthy because if you're not trained in conflict negotiation, if you're not trained in these different things, you might have a really pure heart, but you just can't work through it with another human being. Do you see people that are just kind of hands off in the leadership and leave it up to the team? Do you see that much?
We don't see it a lot, but let me just give you a very simple story about a executive team that was producing pretty good results, but the clashes between two of the executives were palpable. The lack of trust was palpable, and the CEO said to me, "Would you make these guys trust each other?" And I said, "I can't make anybody do
Yeah.
anything,
And can
but
you do it in an hour, Dave?
right, exactly. I can't make anybody do anything." However, when we sat down and just explained to them the difference between what a camera sees in a situation and the meaning they make of something, and if they can separate those and own their what we call stories, then they can have a meaningful conversation. Let me give you an example. In this case, it was about leasing out real estate. And the one executive said, "You are wasting company money on doing tenant upfits so we can lease this real estate." And the other person said, "No, we're making investments to get higher rents. You don't know what you're talking about." And so they would assign all these stories to the data and then they'd argue about their stories. So we reeled them back in to say, can we agree that the data says we spent, $22 million on tenant upfits last year? That's just the data. Okay. Now, separate from that, the meaning I make of that is the story I make up about that is that number was too high, that number was too low, that number was really smart because. So let's just own the fact that we have our own meaning and it's not the truth. It's just the meaning we make of it. And if leaders would do the same thing and recognize they don't own the truth, their job is not to be the teacher. Leaders don't have the answers. Leaders should have the questions and just own your point of view and just say, look, here's the data. The data is we've spent 20 something $1 million on tenant uplifts. The story I make up about that or the meaning I make of that is, and then describe your meanings as not as if, oh, this is the truth. This is what you ought to think. But
Yeah.
instead, here's my point of view. Based on my experience, I'm interested in yours. Then you'll
Sure.
see trust go up and quality of conversation go way up.
Well, and I think that's the key right there is I'm interested in yours. I think
Yeah.
most of the time, we as entrepreneurs, we have a point, we want to get it across, and it's kind of like, the way you asked the question early on, do you have any questions? Most people are going to be like, no. Or you can say, you don't have any questions, do you? No. But the best way that I've seen is like, what questions do you have? Open that up for somebody to communicate that way. Did that end up successfully being worked out, Dave, in that story? Were those two able to kind of come to terms with the tenant improvement situation?
It did, and their use of that language changed the language among the executive team so that people, instead of implying, here are the facts, I'm right, it's now, here's the story I make up about this.
Wow. And that's interesting because we always ask the question, do you want to be right or do you want to be loved? That's the question we ask at home, right? Because I'm like, a lot of times I want to be right. And then I'm like, well, I want to be both, and it's like, well, you can't be both. So do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? You could use the word effective in a business setting. Do you see a lot of people that are still kind of, I want to be right? They at all costs they want to be right as the business owner, or is that kind of starting to go away as
Yeah,
companies?
I think that I'm in control. I need to be right. Those days have passed because those leaders don't get great results. And I'll tell you, but here's the conundrum. Sometimes we'll get really great ideas as leaders, and most of the time, as leaders, we have more experience than other people in the room, and we want to share our great ideas. And so what we do is we come in and we say, "Hey, I've got this great idea." And that may not be the best way to approach it. So, a story in the book is about the CEO of a company who comes into the executive offsite that I was facilitating, and he says, "Hey, I've got a great idea. I want to add another member to the executive team." And I was watching the faces of the executives sitting there, and it was like mom and dad came home with a new kid. It's like, wait a minute, what about me? What happened here?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I said to the CEO, I said, hey, Jeff, I said, do you have somebody in mind? And he said, oh, yes, I do. And Jeff's one of the best CEOs I know. And I said, before you tell us who, I'm guessing you gave this a lot of thought. He said, yeah, I've given it a lot of thought. And so I'm curious to know, what did you consider? How did you know the person that you think is the right person? How did you know they were the right person? He said, well, they're smart, they work really hard, they have organizational credibility, and they think differently than the rest of us. I said, okay, they're smart, organizational cred, work hard, think differently. Those are four great criteria. Let me ask the team, what checklist items would you add if you were thinking about adding somebody to the team? Not who, but how would
Sure.
you know they're the right person? They threw on
Sure.
about two more items, and I said, okay, let's take a minute and let's brainstorm. Who could we add to the team? What names come to you? Take a minute on your own and then share. And so we
Yeah.
came up with a list of about 10 names. And I said to Jeff, I said, okay, cool. I said, would you like to share who you have in mind? He said, no, I want to think about it some more. And the list of criteria they came up with is the list that guides hiring and promotion for executives at that company today.
Yeah.
Because what great leaders do is they think about why their idea is a great idea, and then they go to the team to tap into what we call collective genius. And they just say, look, here's the problem I want to address. Here's what my criteria are. Two questions. Would you add any criteria? And then, given our collective criteria, what would be solutions we should consider? And so everybody is solving the same problem from the same position. And that's collective genius based on this belief all of us are smarter than any of us. So, as
Yeah.
leader, you may have more experience, you may have more authority, but you've only got your experience and you've only got your point of view. So, how do I tap into the collective genius?
So when you have that collective genius, Dave, there's going to be personality differences, there's going to be differences of opinion, there's going to
Sure.
be different viewpoints. I mean, how do you work all that out? Because it seems that that's where a lot of this stalls. At least that's what I've seen. Somebody, is holding their ground on one end, somebody's holding their ground on the other end, and there's no compromise, there's no bending, there's not even discussion. It's just like, nope, hey, this is where I'm at. It's like a jury, it's like a hung jury, and nothing gets done in that scenario. Do you see that happen a lot?
Yes, yes, yes. And that's where egos are battling egos because our ego is attached to rightness and our ego is attached to an outcome or idea. And
Yeah,
so the process I described is based on the human psychology that says you cannot hear somebody else until you are heard. You cannot hear somebody else until you are heard. So we have techniques for starting meetings, for making decisions where people are heard first. And so asking you, hey, Dave, what criteria would you consider in a great outcome here? How would you know it's a great outcome? If I brought you 10 ideas, how would you know which one is the best? It's because
sure.
you have a list of criteria based on your experience. So I'd like you to consider what criteria should we add. Then my solutions are based on a common set of criteria and they're not my solutions anymore. We just list them all out and then we don't discuss them. We don't debate them. And that's a chapter called Drama-Free Problem Solving. All we do is say, Dave, here is a list of 20 ideas we've come up with. Here are 5 votes. I want you to take a minute and think about where you place your votes. And you can place all 5 votes against one idea or spread them out. And collectively, we'll see which idea we think is best with no
Sure.
discussion. There's no
Wow.
ego. It doesn't have your name by the idea. It's just an idea. It
Yeah.
takes all the drama out of it.
Well, Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand, and then be understood. So I kind of
Yes.
like where you're headed, where it's like, you know what, we need to be able to understand others before they are understanding us. Because let's face it, if you're the owner, you're the in charge person, whatever, words work in your world, you potentially probably have an idea. And a lot of times, leaders, owners, entrepreneurs start with that idea and then they try to sell it to the group. Are you suggesting doing it a little different where you withhold your ideas till the end, or what are your
Yes.
thoughts?
Yes, we have a saying that actually works. It's leaders go last, except when it comes to vulnerability, and then leaders go first. So leaders go last. If you
Yeah,
share your idea first, you've just set off the discussion and told people what, and then you get the, oh, that's a great idea, Dave. Oh,
yeah,
yeah, that's wonderful. You don't
yeah,
learn a thing. So if you believe you are God's gift to ideas, do that. If you
yeah,
believe that collectively we can come up with better options, and you can share your idea last and your ego doesn't make you share it first, you will get much better results and people will feel they own the outcome. Whether or not it was their idea doesn't matter. They know that they were heard and they were part of the process. And entrepreneurs do need to sell, but you sell after you've used collective genius and after you've come up with an idea. That's when the selling begins, not at the idea stage.
yeah. And that's where I think a lot of leaders get stuck is they are trying to get buy-in on their idea, which it could be a limiting idea, it could be a wrong idea, it could be again, we talked about blind spots before, it could be a blind spot situation. But I think that if people walk away today with the thought process of just letting others share first their thoughts, it's a safer place. I like that leaders go last everywhere except for vulnerability. And there's a lot of leaders that aren't necessarily on board with this vulnerable thing. My dad would, when he was alive, he's always like, don't let him see a sweat. And it's like,
Nope,
that's
nope.
that's that concept, right? Of hey, I'm gonna, not gonna sweat. Well, what's that bead coming down, right? They're gonna see it. So it's like, what do you do, So but are you seeing vulnerability as becoming a more and more common word that people are able to work with, or is it still one that is challenging to a lot of teams?
If you think vulnerability is a sign of weakness, I would ask yourself, is that fact or is that story? Is that what the camera
Yeah,
sees or is that story? And I would argue that vulnerability is not, oh, I don't know what to do. What should we do? That's not vulnerability. That's stupidity. What vulnerability is to say, you know what? I may not know the right answer. I may not have all the answers, but you know what? I'll bet collectively we can come up with great answers. That's what
yeah,
vulnerability looks like.
yeah,
I'm not
absolutely.
perfect. I know that. I know I've got blind spots, but I feel like I can count on you to work together. And I will tell you, after you use the Covey technique or after you ask the question and people give you an answer, the worst thing you can do is then provide your judgment of the answer. Well,
Mm.
we tried that back in 52. Um, don't judge.
Oh my
Judgment
gosh.
and curiosity cannot coexist. If you are
Sure.
judging, you cannot be curious. What instead great leaders do to inspire people is to say, Dave, that's an interesting idea. Can you tell me how you came up with that idea? Or Dave, can you
Yeah.
tell me what else you considered? Because
Sure.
then people will teach you what they know and don't know, and then you know where to add on.
Yeah, wow, that's great. The visual that I get, Dave, is an iceberg, and that little chunk above the water is what you're talking about, and then this big monster chunk down below is what oftentimes doesn't get dealt with in a team. Why are we here is one of those deeper things down there. Why am I here specifically on this team? Where are we headed? And those sorts of things, let's face it, they take time, they take reflection, they take practice, but not doing it, I feel like you just stay above the water where most people stay, and you don't get that deeper sense of satisfaction. And I want to go all the way back as we start to land the plane today. I want to go all the way back to the question of why do employees stop caring? In your book, in your research, has it boiled down to one or two things that you've identified, or is it still a long list of things?
It's pretty simple. It's because they're seen as human beings, not human doings. It's the account receivable clerk. It's not a person who actually has great experience to offer, not because of their professional experience, but because of life experience. We don't recognize people as human beings. We don't
Hmm.
take enough time to listen when we ask, "How are you?" or to understand what they're celebrating personally, what they're celebrating professionally before we ask them to do something. So it's seeing people as human doings, not human beings. It's an
Gotcha.
old belief about leadership that we have to have the answers. Not true. If you have to
Sure.
have the answers, the organization's ability to grow is limited by your own experience and your lack of experience in lots of areas, right? And
Wow.
the third is our leaders lack tools today that cost nothing. It's just simple training to engage people and invite them in to create great and get
Yeah.
aligned on what great looks like and how we're going to do it. Those are the three things that we see. And in the absence of those, it's like, tell me what you want me to do, Dave, and I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the job and thank you for the benefits. See you
Yep.
Friday
For
night.
sure. Yep. Exactly. Well, and that's the thing about it, I think, is when I started like doing deeper dives, like when I wrote my book, Growing on Purpose, about how to strengthen the team, I realized in the research that I did, to your point, that there's a lot of stuff we as leaders can do that don't cost money. People are thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to spend all this money. I gotta buy these expensive gifts and all this. And it's like, wow, when you really do the research, it doesn't look like you're spending a lot of money. Obviously, some energy and some time, but attaboys are like one of the greatest ways that you can call somebody out in a positive way and give them accolades for what they're doing, and it doesn't cost anything.
Right.
And I've run into leaders that knew their team intimately, which then increased that engagement. And then I've known team leaders that like, are you on my team? They didn't even know if they were part of that team. There's such a huge difference there. So just to reiterate for you, the buy-in advantage, your book a lot of things in there don't cost money to find ways to increase engagement. Is that correct?
That is correct. It doesn't cost money. It's intent, it's time, it's being
Yeah.
vulnerable, it's recognizing you don't have the answers, but if you've got great questions, you can take the team to new heights.
Wow. Yeah. And some people would rather say, Dave, I'd rather pay you $100 or $1,000 a month, just and they have more money than time. So for somebody like that, I don't know if you have any experience or any feedback, but if somebody's listening and they're like, I got way more money than time, or I don't have the time, even after we talked about this, what do you suggest that they do if they just don't have the time to invest in their team?
Yeah, if they don't, then I would hire somebody who does. Or I would say, what is it that's most important to you? Is it building sustainable value and sustainable results? Or is it putting out fires and feeling like you have to have the answers? And I
Yeah.
think you just have to say what's really important. And you know what? If you don't want to grow the team and that's not important, that's fine. Just accept that you'll never achieve the potential that's possible. And that's
Yeah.
fine. Some people
Yeah.
are okay with that. Cool.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great way to think, is if you don't want it, that's fine, but
Yeah,
don't be mad. I'm always like, hey, don't if you've listened to this podcast and Dave and I have not helped you, I mean, or if we've offered information, but you're not taking it, don't get mad at us. I mean, that's your choice. You have a
sure.
decision what to do after you get to hear this stuff. I would highly encourage people to pick up the book, The Buy-in Advantage: Why Employees Stop Caring, and How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Give Their All. Because again, go back to unlocking potential. And that's just, there's so much there that, we could unpack. I want to ask you one last question before I let you go. What would your tip of the day be, Dave, today? Maybe it's something we covered, maybe it's something that you haven't got out yet, but what would your tip of the day be for the business owner listening?
I do have a tip of the day. Before I do, though, I just want to make
Yeah,
sure that that your listeners know about an offer
sure.
that we have a leaders discussion guide of 45 questions. 45 questions leaders can ask to build buy-in and get curious with your team. We'd love to share it with you. If you just DM me on LinkedIn or email me at engage@Garrison Growth and just put in the subject line positive polarity. Positive Polarity, DM me on LinkedIn or engage at Garrison Growth. Love to share that guide with you. And you can pick the questions you want to ask and put it to work. And again, the cost is nothing except
Awesome.
time and intent. So Dave, the
Sure.
tip for the day
Yeah.
is three is greater than seven. This is new math. Three is greater than seven. And what that means is if you have seven priorities that you're asking people to pursue, you have none because the human brain can focus on about three things at once. So it's three things, three things, three things. The also applies to problem solving. If you've got more than three people on a problem, you probably have too many.
Mm,
Google
wow.
taught us that three people are what it takes to solve any problem. And then they can bring the solutions back to a larger group for comment or input. But
Sure.
three people, if you pick the three people properly, can address any problem. So just consider three is greater than seven.
Wow, new math today. You heard it here first. So, hey, don't if you got a math problem, talk to Dave. I'm not the math guy, okay? But like you mentioned, engage at garrisongrowth.com. If you put positive polarity in there as the subject, he'll send you 45 questions that you can ask. Again, there's also where would people find that assessment that you were talking about? Is that at garrisongrowth.com as well?
If you go to a site called buyinbook.com, B-U-Y-I-N book.com, buyinbook.com, you'll find an individual assessment you can take that takes about 90 seconds or a team assessment. Both are free and find out if you have a buy-in issue or what you could do to make your buy-in even better. Maybe you're rocking it with buy-in. I'd ask, can you take it to the next level? Check it out, ask your team, create a plan.
Yeah, wow, that's great. And I think that's where a lot of leaders get scared is I'll do the assessment, but ask my team. There are a lot of times they're afraid of the answers, or they flip it around. You know what? This is for the team. I'll let them do the work and the heavy lifting, and I don't need to, do anything here. I got enough going on. So hopefully you're neither one of those. Hopefully you find that middle ground, that balance where you and your team are working in unison with each other and they're connected. The team is connected because when you have connection on the team, you definitely have buy-in and engagement. So that's fantastic. Um, Last question, I'll let you go. If somebody's listening right now, Dave, and they are really intrigued by what we've talked about, they want to learn more about you, they want to learn more about how they can connect with Garrison Growth, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, either LinkedIn or that engage at garrisongrowth.com. Either one will get to us. And we love to hear about experiences. So maybe you just want to share a great experience. Maybe you want to tell us what works for you. We're like a sponge. We want to learn. Or share with us a challenge. And we're just glad, hop on a 15-minute call and we're glad to give you some feedback.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so great. And that's where, again, I think it's so powerful. Rather than jump into your next podcast, jump into your next activity, cross off your next thing on your list, sit with what Dave mentioned today and realize that, you know what, regardless of how you do this, engagement is still there. I mean, if you say I don't want to believe in it, then it's no longer there. It's still there. We still have a team that shows up every day and they have a choice. They can either further themselves, their company, and their customer, or they can do the it's not my job. They can do the quiet quitting. They can do a variety of things that don't move your company forward. And one last thing that I always think of is the day they were hired, they were pretty close to engaged. Somewhere they either moved up in the engagement or they moved down. And that's where I feel leaders have such an important role to play. So I appreciate everything that you're sharing. Go to buyinbook.com for some free assessments. Go to engage at garrisongrowth.com if you want to get 45 questions. I'm going to be looking at both of those. So watch for my stuff coming through, Dave. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Thank you for unpacking this. And again, check out the book, The Buy-in Advantage. It's available on his website, garrisongrowth.com, or you can get it at Amazon. Go to his website because Amazon only gives you like 15 cents when you buy a book through Amazon, at least for us. So we always are like, hey, don't buy it from Amazon, although we love Amazon. It's like, oh my gosh, try going the other route. So thank you, Dave, so much for hanging out. And I can't wait to keep learning from you. And I'm excited to look at these 45 questions and jump in on these assessments and see how they can help us.
Thank you, Dave. Enjoy the journey.